On parts of social media, it has become a familiar sight. Shaky phone footage, often shot at night and accompanied by a soundtrack of creative Russian swearing, showing the view from a random apartment building in the arse end of nowhere. As the clip plays, there's a boom. Maybe a flash of light, or even a fireball, or maybe there's just the distant ominous glow of flames rising up into the night sky. So, no. These aren't candid images of another Chelyabinsk event. Rather, they're testimony to a concerted wartime strategy planned and executed hundreds of kilometers away. A Ukrainian plan to hit Russia where it hurts the most: their oil refining capacity. You see, since August, Russian refineries have been pummeled with drones. 16 out of the nation's 38 refineries have so far been struck. Of those, at least 5 have been hit more than once, with one in Volgograd being struck 4 times in 2 months. By early October, between 4 and 5 such attacks were being reported every week. As The Economist noted, quote, "Soon they will be daily." At this point, some of you may be wondering if this is a glitch in the matrix. Didn't we already see a Ukrainian deep strike campaign on Russian oil refineries? The difference between now and the springtime campaign of 2024, though, is one of intensity. Last year, Kyiv was only able to strike 2 refineries with any regularity, Krasnodar and Rostov, because they're close to the border. And the explosive payloads the drones carried were far smaller. Now, though, those drones are repeatedly hitting refineries like Salavat in Bashkortostan, which is over 1,400 kilometers away from Ukraine. As Sergei Vakalenko writes in Carnegie Politica, now Ukrainian drones can fly further, carry bigger payloads, and attack more frequently. The refinery attacks are part of a wider deep strike campaign the Ukrainians unleashed at the start of August, one that has also targeted fuel trains, weapons manufacturers, and oil pipelines.
And now a quick word from our sponsor, me, or more precisely, my website, fronts.co. Have you ever found yourself thinking, there's just not enough content on WarFronts. 6 videos a week is just not enough for me. I want the world to be crazier. I want more war, more death. Well, 1, what's wrong with you? And 2, well, great news. Extra WarFronts content is now at your fingertips over at fronts.co. Look at that. Yes, starting this very week, we'll be posting 2 exclusive videos every week to our new subscriber-only website, fronts.co. For just $5 a month, you'll gain access to brand new WarFronts content that won't be available on YouTube. Our first videos are already up, exploring topics as timely as whether Poland could win a war against Russia, and as timeless as how South Korea came to build the best tank on Earth. And to sweeten the deal, we're also asking our writers to contribute 2 in-depth written articles each week, exploring some unusual or less appreciated angle on geopolitics and warfare. So, not only will you get more of the videos you love, you'll also get a chance to read some of our writers' unfiltered takes on war news. So look, if you like this channel, you'll love fronts.co. Again, $5 a month. It helps support us here at Fronts, WarFronts, Political Fronts, and fronts.co. And nothing is changing here. I have learned from the mistakes of past YouTubers. We are not doing a paywall on any existing content. The 6 videos a week will be here for you just as before. It's all just gravy, baby! Don't know why I went all Austin Powers there. But yeah, fronts.co. Just go there. Good domain, right? It was expensive.
But it's the strikes on Russia's oil refining capacity that have proven most impactful. Reuters estimates that at least 17% of that capacity is now offline, with some estimates going as high as 38%, although there are good reasons to be wary of such rosy figures. Either way, at least 1 million barrels a day are currently being lost, and that will only increase as more refineries are targeted for repeat attacks, which make damage harder to repair. The impact's already visible on the Russian home front. According to the Financial Times, wholesale prices of petrol have surged by more than 40% since January, with the strikes leading to shortages. Local outlet Kommersant reported that September saw a shortfall of 400,000 tons of petrol out of the 2 million regularly delivered. And that's led to problems. Not everywhere, and not equally distributed, but visible, undeniable problems nonetheless. As is always the case in wartime Russia, these problems have hit the periphery hardest. The Far East and southern central regions were the first to suffer, with about 14% of filling stations in Russia's south being forced to shutter. In other areas, the pro-government newspaper Izvestia reports drivers being limited to only 10 or 20 litres of petrol. Speaking to the BBC, one station owner declared that his industry, quote, haven't had a crisis like this since hyperinflation in 1993 to 1994. But nothing comes close to the problems being reported in occupied Crimea. There, a full 50% of petrol stations have run dry, with the rest implementing rationing. Now, before you get the impression that this is some sort of societal collapse, we should be clear about what sectors are not being affected. The shortages only concern petrol, not diesel. And that's important because diesel is the fuel that runs not only tanks on the battlefield, but also most of the agricultural sector. So there's currently zero chance that this will spiral either into a food crisis or a scenario where military vehicles on the front lines grind to a halt. Different regions are also experiencing the crisis in very different ways. When the BBC spoke to people around Moscow, many seemed unaware that there was a fuel shortage in other parts of the country. And while some problems have been reported at stations around St. Petersburg's Rin Road, the general trend seems to be that the richer western regions are being sheltered from the impact. Still, the regions that are being hit hard. While it's small and independent petrol station owners who are suffering the most, even the big conglomerates are having difficulties. In Astrakhan Oblast in the south, even some Gazprom stations are running dry. You can see the effects just by looking at industry-related statistics and official statements. In September, petrol imports from Belarus to Russia rose 168%. That same month, the Kremlin extended a ban on petrol exports and implemented a new one on diesel exports. However, we should point out that statistics will only get you so far. After the 2024 strike campaign, the government classified the production figures, meaning there's a lot of uncertainty around the precise impact of these refineries going up in flames. And that makes evaluating the effectiveness of all of this nearly impossible. In his piece for Carnegie Politica, Sergei Vakulenko points out that the amount of production capacity taken offline is not a static thing. Stricken refineries are repaired, new refineries are hit, and even the ones hit multiple times may have a lot of backup and spare capacity. Just to quote him on a relevant example, Russian refineries tend to have surplus primary distilling capacity and bottlenecks when it comes to secondary treatment and conversion units turning distillates into market-grade fuel. Therefore, the destruction of one or two identical atmospheric distillation columns in a refinery is more likely to lead to a 30% drop in gasoline production, not 50%, as you might expect. And don't worry if you're now thinking, well, what the fuck is an atmospheric distillation column, Simon? The important part of all of this isn't to grasp the mechanics of the oil industry, just to understand that damaging its capacity is a bit more complex than just drone hits building goes boom. It also depends what part of the refinery is hit. The Economist points out that some pieces of equipment are easier to replace than others. We'll quote them here. The destruction of the cracking units that break down crude oil into petrol, diesel, and aviation fuel is a major difficulty because they are very costly and because the sanctions regime makes them extremely hard to replace. So, each strike on a refinery has a lot of variables that will affect its overall impact. And it also depends on whether a given refinery is being struck for the first or second or even third time. The more hits, the harder it becomes to repair, and the more likely it is to lose production capacity over a longer time. Nor is war a one-way street. We've recently seen Russia step up its own attacks on Ukraine's gas production facilities. Engelsberg Ideas has suggested that in a war of deep strikes, Moscow is more likely to prevail. We'll quote them here. Moscow's forces are systematically chewing up Ukraine's electricity, transport, oil refinery, and communication systems much faster than Ukraine is able to do the same. End quote. But that doesn't mean you should expect Ukraine's latest strike campaign to stop. Far from it. In fact, there are grounds to believe that Kyiv is only just getting started. You remember a few weeks ago when those Russian drones intruded into Polish airspace? As we and many other outlets noted at the time, the incursion revealed a worrying gap in European air defenses, whereby multi-million-dollar interceptors were needed to down weapons that only cost the Kremlin tens of thousands of dollars. Well, that's true for Europe, but it's also true for Russia. Most of the recent strikes on refineries have been carried out by Firepoint FP1 drones, which cost a mere $55,000. Even given the fact that multiple drones are shot down for every one that gets through, that still means the Ukrainians are paying close to zero for attacks that can cost the Russians millions and millions. And carrying out successful strikes is remarkably easy. The issue for Moscow is that their country is, well, really, really big. They've got a lot of refineries, and they've only got limited air defense assets. As the Atlantic Council writes of the wider deep strike campaign, quoting them, the Kremlin simply does not have enough air defense systems to protect thousands of potential military and energy targets spread across 11 time zones. In short, this is a cost-effective, relatively easy campaign that has the potential to offer outsized returns. As President Zelensky told reporters in August, quote, "The most effective sanctions, the ones that work the fastest, are the fires at Russia's oil refineries, its terminals, oil depots. This speaks to what has become one of Ukraine's core theories of victory, that crippling the economy and making ordinary people feel the pain will force Putin to negotiate. Back in 2024, military intelligence chief Kirill Budanov asserted that Russia needed to win the war by early 2026 or the Kremlin would face an economic crisis. In the event, while there are clear signs the Russian economy is under strain, issues don't appear to be mounting as fast as Kiev hoped. The strike campaign, then, can be seen as an attempt to hurry those problems along, to force the Kremlin to make unpleasant trade-offs sooner rather than later. Remember, for all the talk online about Russia's massive tolerance for pain, harkening back to the colossal losses it kept fighting through in World War II, the reality is that Putin is sensitive to public opinion. After the partial mobilization of autumn 2022 caused his popularity to reach one of its lowest ever levels, the Kremlin has taken great pains to avoid another rout. At the same time, it has tried its best to shield the elite of cities like Moscow from the effects of the war, while also paying such large bonuses to volunteers from the regions that many once neglected areas are now experiencing economic booms. So the TLDR version is that Putin isn't a guy who likes hard decisions, because he likes being popular. And with these strikes, Ukraine is trying to force him into making unpopular trade-offs. To be clear, those trade-offs are still some way away. Russia can still import from China and Belarus. It has stockpiles it can dip into. Fuel quality standards can be lowered. Petrol rationing could be extended to parts of the nation that are currently unaffected. At the moment, the campaign is more of a costly annoyance and an embarrassment to the Kremlin than any sort of existential threat. And we need to emphasize that some believe it may stay that way. Speaking to The Telegraph, Rusi analyst Emily Ferris noted that while the strikes are a source of major frustration for Moscow, at this stage, quote, the situation is not critical. Russia has enough oil and gas reserves and financial reserves to push through this inconvenience, and the goal of subjugating Ukraine is much more of a valued prize. And look, she's not the only one. Writing in Engelsberg Ideas, Owen Matthews points out that Ukraine's economy is a tenth the size of Russia's, and that its own infrastructure and energy are taking a pummeling. In his own words, under present circumstances, a Ukrainian economic and military collapse still remains likelier than a Russian one. However, not everyone agrees with these takes. For other analysts, the important thing isn't what the strike campaign is achieving today, but what it might accomplish in the near future. Part of this is the increasing tempo we mentioned earlier. From a couple of strikes a week in August, Ukraine has gone on to hitting targets up to 4 or 5 times a week. Should the attacks become a daily occurrence, a lot more refineries may wind up sustaining damage that takes a long time and a lot of expense to repair. And then there's the unknown factor of Ukraine's new, domestically produced cruise missile, the FP5 Flamingo. A relatively crude weapon, it's unable to pull off the truly complex maneuvers that make some of Russia's best missiles so tricky to intercept. But the goal seems to be to make up for the likely high shoot-down rate with 2 things: cheap mass production and an insanely large warhead. Clocking it at over 1,000 kilograms, the Flamingo's warhead is, to use a technical term, fucking massive. It's twice the size of a Tomahawk's, and while the Tomahawk is far more stealthy and cutting edge, Kiev's hope seems to be that it can produce enough Flamingos at an affordable cost to ensure that those massive warheads occasionally make it through to strike their targets. To quote the Atlantic Council again, if Kiev reaches its goal of mass-produced long-range cruise missiles, the consequences for Russia's refineries, ports, and pipelines could be catastrophic. Now look, the Flamingo isn't slated to go into mass production until the end of the year, but even until the point it can be routinely used to strike Russian infrastructure, Kiev can still dial up the pressure. If more refineries start being struck, and more of those are struck repeatedly, well then the problems for the Kremlin will start to mount. Here's Sergei Vakulenko one more time. Russia's oil refineries are a bit like a man who is being repeatedly punched. He will not die from one punch, or even half a dozen punches, but it becomes harder and harder for him to recover after each subsequent blow. Although no single punch is fatal, he could end up being beaten to death. And again, look, we need to emphasize that any sort of crisis for Russia is still a long way off. The likelihood that you check the news tomorrow and see a story about Putin being lynched by angry Russian drivers is remote, but that's also not the goal. The Ukrainian goal, as far as we can tell, is to keep increasing the pressure on a Russian economy that's already flashing some warning signs, an economy that's feeling the strain even as the strain on the front line also grows. Just a couple of days ago, a leaked Russian document appeared to show that Moscow saw 87,000 troops killed in action between January and September of this year. That is not casualties, which typically includes the wounded, the missing, and soldiers who died away from the battlefield due to other causes, but killed in action. By way of comparison, the United States saw slightly under 41,000 troops killed in action in the entire Vietnam War. Moscow lost over double that in a mere 9 months of fighting. Those numbers are unsustainable, at least without a massively unpopular general mobilization, and we can already see the impact this is having in recruitment officers. After years in which ever-growing sign-up bonuses kept a steady stream of troops coming to the front, the first reports are coming in of regions struggling to meet their recruitment targets. Again, things are far from crisis levels here, but Ukraine's gamble is that massive losses on a front line that is only moving forwards at a glacial pace, combined with mounting strikes on critical homeland infrastructure, might be enough to cause Putin to throw in the towel and cut a peace deal. Will it work? Who knows? The last 3.5 years of war have shown that many assumptions about Putin's threshold for pain have been proven wrong. The West gambled on massive sanctions to bring him to the table. The Ukrainians tried to turn the war into another Afghanistan, hoping to kill so many Russian soldiers that families would pressure Putin into ending the war. Both of those theories of victory turned out to be flawed. And who's to say that today's long-range strikes on oil refineries won't go the same way? But the fact is that Ukraine's latest campaign is having an impact, one that's starting to trickle through to ordinary Russians. Whether that's enough to finally cause Putin to call a halt to his war of conquest is just something we'll have to wait and see. Thank you for watching.